Let's start with the anatomy of the follicle. What happens? So the first follicle or the first phase of the follicle we have is the primordial follicle. So the primordial follicle is just a follicle that is surrounding the primary oocytes, and this primary oocyte is surrounded by a follicle, and the follicle is a single layer of squamous cell. So if a boy or a guy or a man say your breast is squamous or your buttocks or nyash is squamous, that simply means that that man is indirectly telling you that your breast is flat. So when somebody said you are squamous, that means you are flat. So the primary oocyte is surrounded by a squamous cell. This squamous cell is what's called the primordial follicle. Now, this on stimulation of follicle stimulating hormone, this follicle stimulating hormone now lead to the development of the primordial follicle to the primary follicle. Remember, both the primordial follicle and the primary follicle, this primordial follicle has inhibiting hormone that will keep this oocyte from developing and inhibited until during puberty. Don't forget that. That is mostly asked question. So the primordial follicle have a cuboidal granulosa cells surrounding the primary oocyte. Remember, in the primary or the primordial follicle, we have single layer of squamous cell called primordial follicle. While in the primary follicle, we have cuboidal. Cuboidal means they are the same shape. We have the same shape. They have the same shape surrounding the primary oocyte, and this primary oocyte is now called the primary follicle. Remember, all of them have primary oocytes, just that the difference between this primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, and the Graafian follicle is that there is always constant changes in the follicle. There is always constant changes in the follicle, but in all, there is always presence of what? Primary oocytes. Don't forget that. And from there, we now move on to the secondary follicle. So the characteristics on stimulation of follicle stimulating hormone, the main thing you have to understand is the presence of antrum. So what is antrum? Antrum is a fluid-filled area that is mostly secreted by the granulosa cells. They are fluid that is secreted by the granulosa cells, and these cells are mostly, they secrete fluid called estrogen and progesterone. So this estrogen and progesterone, mostly is estrogen, they now start occupying this area. So the presence of antrum is what we call the secondary follicle. So that describe and characterize the presence of secondary follicle, the presence of what? Antrum. Now we have the Graafian follicle. The Graafian follicle is the secondary follicle at its most matured stage. So when the secondary follicle have matured at its most matured stage, we call it Graafian follicle. And this Graafian follicle now bulge out at the surface of the ovary, ready for ovulation.